Do you ever feel like tonguing on clarinet is a chore and not very enjoyable? You're not alone. It took me a good 3 years of hard practice to understand what I was doing with my articulation. And even after all that, it's something I have to practice almost every day so I don't lose the progress I've already made. So in today's video, I'll be breaking down clarinet tonguing and hopefully explaining how to tongue on the reed properly so you don't waste your valuable practice time. Hey, it's Julianna from Clarinet Note Studio, and welcome back to my channel. Tonguing on clarinet is one of those skills that's hard to teach and hard to grasp as a student right away. So if you're feeling discouraged about your tonguing, your progress with articulation, don't worry, you're not alone. And hopefully some of these tips will help guide you in the right direction. Articulation on clarinet is a crucial technique that affects the overall sound, phrasing, and musicality of your playing. So here are steps and tips to help you tongue effectively on clarinet. Number 1, tongue position. I feel like I can't talk about tonguing until I talk about tongue position. A good rule to remember is the tip of the tongue to the tip of the reed. That being said, I've had many students misinterpret what that means. Here's an illustration that might clear up any confusion. Over the years, I've seen students interpret tip of the tongue to the tip of the reed as tip of the tongue on top of the reed, or tip of the tongue below the tip of the reed. I've also seen many students tongue on the tip of the reed behind the tip of the tongue, like this illustration. One other issue that is very common is anchor tonguing. This happens when the clarinetist anchors their tongue on a part of their teeth or interior of the oral cavity and tonguing with parts of the tongue that are not the tip of the tongue. I've seen students anchor the tip of their tongue behind their bottom teeth, essentially creating a situation where they then tongue behind the tip of the tongue, seen in this illustration above. And then I'll also demonstrate right now what that can sound like when I anchor my tongue behind my lower teeth right here. And I'm just tonguing with the back of my tip of the tongue, like right there. So you're going to get this sort of sound. It's kind of like a thuddy sound, and it doesn't have a very clean articulation or tone, as opposed to tip of the tongue to the tip of the reed, which is, you have a lot more freedom with that as well. Another common tonguing mistake is to tongue on the roof of the mouth, or anchor your tongue on the roof of the mouth, and you might be tonguing with the back of the tip of the reed. I've had more than one student do that. So you're essentially anchoring your tip of your tongue behind your upper teeth and on the roof of your mouth, and you're essentially tonguing back here with the back of the tip, and that you actually get, it actually sounds pretty good, but it doesn't give you much freedom or clarity, but it sounds kind of like this. You can get a lot of speed that way, but you're essentially kind of tonguing on top of the mouthpiece. So you want to avoid that as much as possible, because while it may give you speed tonguing that way, ultimately it will limit your articulation speed and flexibility. Now that we've covered how the tip of the tongue functions, let's shift to how the middle and the back of the tongue function in clarinet articulation. The middle part of the tongue works best, in my experience, when it's not kept in a straight line like this, from the back to the tip. So, in other words, if you can implement a swale, which I'll insert a picture here of what a swale looks like in landscaping. But if you can implement a swale or a dip in the middle of the tongue, number one, it helps with the tongue position and support of the tip of the tongue in such a way where it naturally is in the correct position to maintain the tip of the tongue to the tip of the reed roll. And number 2, the dip in the middle of the tongue helps with overall tone quality. And here's what a swale to the tongue position looks like. Now let's talk about the back of the tongue. So the back of the tongue position, ideally you want the back of the tongue to be in a higher position like this. Like saying, you can think the vowel sound E, or you can think T, ki, he. Those are all good vowel sounds to articulate. My college clarinet professor, Dr. Charles West, often compared whistling to the perfect model for clarinet tongue position. So if you go, you just notice how your tongue, what position it's in, and that will put you on the right track for the correct tongue position. In the following examples, notice how the vowel sound ah does not put the tongue position, or the back of the tongue, in the correct position, but saying e or he moves the back of the tongue into the perfect spot. So I remember when I was in college, I also took saxophone lessons, and I remember my teacher in college that taught saxophone, we were talking about tongue position on saxophone, which is a little different. The way he explained it was a little different than how I learned how to tongue on clarinet. But anyway, I remember him saying, wouldn't it be wonderful if one day, we could film inside your mouth to see what's going on with tonguing? Well, I'd like to say it actually exists now. It didn't exist back in 1996 when I was in college, but I found an article in the International Clarinet Association's, I believe it's online, and I'll definitely leave a link because I think everyone should check it out. It's really fascinating. But Dr. Kornel Wolak, he's been conducting research at the Oral Dynamics Laboratories at the University of Toronto's Speech Language Pathology Department. And together with some other scientists and doctors, he set out to examine the inside of a player's mouth in real time while playing, and observing with the machines, such as a 3D electromagnetic articulograph, to record the movements of the tongue and sort of what happens in the oral cavity. I'll leave a link in the description box. You can check that out. I don't want to show too many pictures because that's his research, and I don't want to, infringe on any copyright issues. But here's a picture of what the electrodes on his tongue look like. But you can check out the article below. Now let's move on to number 2, air support. Since we just covered the mechanics of the tongue position, let's move on to what your air should be doing during articulation. First, always remember that your airstream should never stop in between tongue notes. Imagine water coming out of a garden hose continuously, and the tongue being represented by a ball that moves through the water and touches the reed and slightly pulls away between articulations. In other words, the air, or the water in this example, doesn't stop in between the articulation, which is the ball bouncing. Moving on to number 3, minimizing tongue strokes. In order to maintain your tongue position and get faster at articulating, it's important to minimize the distance that the tongue travels to and from the tip of the reed during articulated passages. A good rule to follow for this idea is the farther the tongue moves away from the reed, you'll typically hear your tone or your sound spread. So it can sound like this when I'm moving the tongue too far away. You hear that, like that dip in the sound, it sounds real, I don't know, it doesn't sound very pleasant, right? So understand that articulation refers to how you start and stop each note. It involves tonguing, which is the start of the note, and releasing the tongue, which is stopping the note, to control the sound and achieve clarity. I also highly recommend adding this book to your library. It's called The Embouchure Building for Clarinetists by Larry Guy. This book goes into depth on articulation topics and offers many exercises to implement good articulation techniques. So remember, regular and consistent practice of articulation exercises and incorporating articulation techniques into your daily practice will help you develop and refine your tonguing skills. Mastering articulation takes time and patience, like a lot of patience. So practicing consistently and gradually increasing the complexity of your exercises to improve your clarinet articulation is also a really good idea. There are some other informative videos on YouTube that you might want to check out about clarinet articulation. I'll also link some helpful articles and PDFs for more information about how to articulate in the description box as well. And I've also included a resource on my website that you might find helpful. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you have a great week. Bye.